Welcome. I'm Ann Steffen from the University of Missouri St. Louis, and I'm also affiliated with the Optimal Aging Center. This is an overview video of the Skills for Healthy Sleep personalized module from the Treating Later Life Depression Workbook and Clinician Guide by Oxford University Press. And, as you can see here, the Skills for Healthy Sleep is one of a series of personalized modules that are part of the Treating Later Life Depression approach. And as we get started talking about this specific module, I'd just like to remind all of us that we commonly feel awkward when we're learning a new intervention approach or using materials for the first time. And it usually takes all of us, myself included, to go through some of these materials with 2 to 3 clients before we feel comfortable and confident with the material. As we've developed the second edition of the workbook, we've really worked to make all of the didactic pages and the practice forms, those between session opportunities to develop some skills, as easy and straightforward as possible. So the majority of the information, both in terms of content and possible discussion questions, are already provided on the forum to really make this as seamless as possible for you. So the best way to actually learn how to use an intervention approach is to get started in using it with your clients. And we hope that this is helpful for you. Some of you are going to be working within relatively brief formats, such as integrated primary care, EAP programs, or care management. For the rest of us who are working in individual psychotherapy, we'd like to encourage you to resist this urge to jump from module to module really frequently. We'd like to suggest that as you're using the later life depression materials, that in that personalized module options, that you and your clients are very strategically selecting 1 or 2 modules that are the most important for them. So we believe that the best outcomes are found when you're staying within a few number of modules in those personalized modules, and then really emphasizing that habit development. And that's a concept that's familiar to middle-aged and older adults. We understand that involves a lot of repetition, development, and maintaining good, healthy habits, stepping away from habits that are less helpful. And so we're really planning on emphasizing the importance of repetition and the development of backup times during high stress. And so in today's orientation module, I'm going to be providing a relatively brief overview of the Skills for Healthy Sleep personalized module. I'll be walking through some tips and reminders about within session management. And then I'll also be directing you to specific page numbers within the clinician guide where you can get additional information. And we do think that this overview video is going to be the most helpful if you have the Later Life Depression Workbook and the clinician guide with you while you're watching this video. So in the clinician guide, the material on skills for healthy sleep are provided in chapter 13, which is pages 219 to 229 of a clinician guide. And you can see that we provide a range of both learn forms for that within session sort of psychoeducation and discussion, as well as a handful of practice forms for between session work. We do not expect any one clinician to use all of these materials with any one client. This is really a compendium of resources for picking and choosing those that are the best fit for an individual client. And then you see that within the clinician guide, we also denote those forms that we found to be most compatible with telehealth practice. So our approach is very compatible with Pam Hayes' addressing framework for understanding cultural diversity. And, through that lens, age and generational status is one of a series of cultural identities that can be important for any given individual. And so through that attention to intersectionality, we're doing our assessments with a lot of emphasis on cultural respect. We're spending time early on in the treatment approach and identifying culturally related strengths and supports. And we're really clarifying which issues are environmental that may require some problem solving versus the parts that may involve new skill development in any given client. So examples of the ways in which we do that are provided in the skills for getting started core module earlier on in treatment. And you see examples of 2 forms here. which are some of the ways in which we do some of this work early on in treatment. And so in the Celebrating Diversity Start 11 Learn page, it's an opportunity for the client and the therapist to each have a copy of this in front of them and engage in a discussion of the identities that are most important for that individual, how that has shaped their experiences over life, the development of strengths that they have, and then who in their chosen family network provides the most support that they share the most in common with. And then we link that to discussion of values and strengths so that we're early on in treatment having a sense of what's most important to that individual, how begin a dialogue of how some of those values and strengths may be helpful for the individual during psychotherapy, and then who in their life may share some of their values and how they might be able to use that individual as a source of support while they're working on their depression. So we have a whole chapter in the clinician guide that is focused on assessment. That's in chapter 3, which is on pages 35 to 58 of the clinician guide. But then in Appendix D, we have a series of practice-ready assessment tools that are available for your use with individual clients. In the Skills for Healthy Sleep module, we are focused on psychoeducation about sleep. We're identifying the sleep-related concerns that may or may not be linked to somebody's individual depression. We're working on good sleep hygiene and healthy sleep habits, and then helping the client determine whether their sleep concerns are serious enough to then really require work with a sleep specialist. And so in Sleep to Learn is an example of one of those educational sheet pages in which early on we're discussing what are the processes that are involved in good sleep. And we're really talking about then work on sleep involving stabilizing sleep schedules, which is really harnessing circadian rhythms, helping to promote sleep. So really sort of maximizing the sleep debt and the sleep and the body's need for sleep, and then lowering cognitive arousal. And so you can see here then in the next page, we talk about some common age-related changes in sleep and some of the patterns that may be true for any given individual. So we have an opportunity to do psychoeducation about things that are quite sort of like age appropriate and common as all of us age in terms of changes. And then we link that to information specific to depression and sleep and the ways in which depression and sleep are related to each other. And then we provide some education about obstructive sleep apnea that may be appropriate for some of your clients, and really sort of identifying how important both assessment and evaluation for obstructive sleep apnea is, and then following instructions by the care provider on addressing sleep apnea, such as consistent use of CPAP machines. Sleep 6 Learn is an example of helping the client look at some sleep routines that they may begin to work on, and this form provides an opportunity to talk through, which are easy, oh, I already do that, and then the things that are a bigger stretch for any given individual. Here's an example of one of our practice forms that provides an opportunity for people, at the end of every day to circle the day of the week in which they've been able to engage in that healthy sleep routine, and really sort of identifying, which of these routines seem to be the most important for that individual in helping to stabilize their sleep. And then there's another form, Sleep 8 Learn, that discusses additional sleep hygiene practices to promote healthy sleep. And again, for any given individual, we're not expecting them to suddenly make changes in all areas of their life. And that's where the clinical discernment happens, and where the collaboration between clinician and client is in identifying, okay, so in these conversations that we're having with you, which are the areas that you feel like you already have in pretty good shape? Which things seem so impossible, I don't even want to attempt to make changes in that area? And then what's doable? What are these areas where there's some room for improvement? It might be a little bit of a stretch, a little bit of a challenge, but that's something that we can work on and problem solve together. And so here's another example of a similar practice form that identifies some of those sleep hygiene practices. And certainly the transition to planned naps from unintended dozing is a key piece for many individuals. And then thinking about some of those other sleep hygiene practices that can be useful. So in Sleep 10 Learn, we specifically address stress management and strategies that might be helpful for people who have high arousal, who may have some anxiety associated with end of the night or anticipating sleep. So that might involve relaxation for some individuals, that might involve other evening routines that provide more of an opportunity for winding down without them becoming ritualized. So for any of these, our emphasis is on flexible application, but for individuals who have high anxiety surrounding sleep, we're not interested in then ritualizing and then developing a whole new set of rules that have to be obsessively followed. So all these are meant to be lightly held and lightly applied without them becoming overly ritualized. And so here's an example of another form that provides some stress management. And again, for any one individual, we wouldn't expect them to do all of these, but for them to play some of these strategies that may be more or less helpful for them in sort of winding down and lowering their sense of arousal, both at bedtime or in the middle of the night if they do have some middle of the night wakenings. In Sleep 11 Learn, we provide some education that we think is pretty important in identifying the difference between we've taken in this approach in the sleep module, which is a promotion of healthy sleep strategies, versus a formal treatment program for insomnia. So we are very clearly saying that in the personalized skills for healthy sleep, that this is not cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. This isn't CBTI. This is just basic psychoeducation and some basic sleep hygiene support. But there are some individuals who then may need more intensive, more formal treatment for insomnia, and we provide some recommendations for how to find a specialist in that area. So as you know, we've described in the other personalized modules, we're providing a range of within session learn forms and possible between session practice forms for you and your clients to look at and use together, but we would not expect all these materials to be used with any given individual. This is a compendium resources that allow clinicians and clients together to sort of look over and then pick and choose those that are a particularly good fit for any given individual. So we provide some recommendations in the clinician's guide on what a session by session progress might look like. This isn't meant to be overly formalized or overly strict. Just some clinicians have asked like a sense of like, how do these learn and practice forms go together? So in a potential session one where you're reviewing progress and then you're providing just basic psychoeducation about sleep and doing a review of previous treatment goals. Then in session two, we're introducing some of those basic sleep hygiene practices and then considering either sleep 2 practice or sleep 3, maybe both for a really high functioning, really gung-ho client, but usually you're picking 1 or 2 or sleep 2 practice or sleep 3 practice for that between practice monitoring form. And then in proposed session 3, we're then adding on some of the promotion of healthy sleep that builds the sleep debt. And again, you're choosing from sleeps 2, 3, or 4 practice and not doing all of these, just really, across these, what is it that a particular client thinks would be particularly helpful for them to try out and work on. Then in sessions 4, there are some options for reducing cognitive and physiological arousal. Again, for any given client, you might not necessarily be using all of these, but some of them. And you can see in the session 4 that if you're thinking of this in a 4-week, very sort of circumscribed short module, that there's an opportunity for a review and continuing to moving forward in treatment. Alternatively, some clients may identify that sleep is really a key area for them, and they'd like to develop a specific personalized goal that's related to improving their sleep quality. They think that that's pretty important for their depression treatment as a whole. So we provide some tips for clinicians on pages 218 to 220 in the clinician's guide, and you can see them listed here. And we discuss these in more detail in the clinician guides, and really emphasizing the difference between planned and unplanned naps, facilitating and understanding the sources of caffeine, and some information about that can sometimes be surprising for some clients who think that they already kind of are aware of where they're pulling caffeine on. We provide us some very concrete, practical suggestions for how to work clinically with a client who's developed a pattern of sleeping with the radio or television on, which we know interferes with sleep, even if they're not aware of that interfering with sleep. And then we talk about the importance of addressing sleep-related cognitions, and that in some cases, for some individual clients, you may move from this skills for a healthy sleep module and circling back to the core skills for health for thinking module earlier on in the workbook to work on sleep-related cognitions. As I indicated in the beginning of this overview, we do not think that just the provision of information and suggestions is enough to help most clients with their depression. So insight doesn't automatically translate to behavior change. And so what we're doing is really using the concept of habits and using the language of habits and referring to habits, which is a very familiar concept with middle-aged and older adults, and just emphasizing that we're helping them develop and consolidate some good, healthy habits, and maybe stepping away from some habits that are less healthy, and that requires a lot of repetition and overlearning. And so we'd like to encourage you, even within this work on sleep, that if there's areas of change, that individuals are focusing on like 1 or 2 areas of change at any one time, with that focus on sustained attention and repetition of building healthy habits. So to learn more, again, we cover the skills for healthy sleep in chapters 13 of the clinician guide. And one of the things that we point out in the clinician guide, and that you can see embedded within the workbook, is our attention on routine outcome monitoring, and that we now know that the effectiveness of psychotherapy is really augmented by helping clients systematically track progress as they're going through psychotherapy. And this is now so important, it's considered a good part of ethical practice. And so with that in mind, in every one of the modules, including the sleep module, we provide an opportunity early on in attention to sleep to reviewing their goals that were earlier developed. And then there's opportunity to get another opportunity to discuss where they're at in their therapy goals and the degree to which they've been met or not met so far. There is a resource within this module for helping to develop a new therapy goal that is related to healthy sleep, using, that SMART goal approach to make sure that it's specific enough and tractable enough to be a good therapy goal. And then we provide that information on how to think about progress in therapy, and sort of disabusing the notion that progress in therapy happens through a straight direct line or stair-step approach, but instead that sawtooth pattern of gains and setbacks is that experience that's most commonly what we see in psychotherapy. So it's a jagged, there are improvements and then setbacks, and that because of that, that's one of the reasons why it's so important to track therapy progress in a very detailed, structured way, because after, especially individuals who have a history of depression, experience a setback, they're likely to become discouraged and demoralized. And in those situations, as opposed to just the therapist saying, well, but I want to encourage you because I do see changes in your life in this way, that you have some of those specific therapy goals and the indications of progress that you can look back on as signs of improvement that are much more objective and much more concrete and detailed, that can be very encouraging for clients. So we provide some tips in the clinician guide for managing sessions. We're encouraging clinicians to move away from beginning sessions with, "Hi, how's your week been? How are you doing? What would you like to talk about today?" Instead, begin with a really warm greeting. "Jane, it's so good to see you today. I'm glad that we're here to work together. Let's get started by seeing how you're doing on your therapy progress sheet. And then let's make a short list of how we're going to spend our time today." So for that, as a tool, we provide in the skills for getting started, a preparing for session form that we're encouraging clients to do on their own, either the night before or the morning of a therapy session, or if they're seeing a clinician in a in-person setting, could be completed in the waiting room in no more than 5 or 10 minutes. So this is meant to be just a couple words, a couple phrases, and thinking about the most recent session, thinking about the skills that they've been working on, and whether they've been struggling in any ways, and specifically what it is that they want to report about the past week with an emphasis on major changes. And then what are the topics that they feel are the most important to talk about today's session. And doing that work ahead of the start of the session can go a long way to that collaborative discussion of, like, how many agenda items are we really going to be able to get to in our session time together. So with that in mind, we're really encouraging all clinicians that work with clients to stay specific, to really catch yourself if you're finding yourself with overly broad, overly abstract discussions about life in general, relationships in general, and really focus on either details from the past week or two, or details of something that's coming up in the future. And that's where the best change is going to happen in terms of improving quality of daily life. So a part of work of therapy and CBT is helping to apply these skills in daily life and real life problems. And we know that between session practice is an important part of that. So we have some recommendations in the clinician guide and some reminders of how important it is to have that discussion of between session practice be done collaboratively in the development of the specifics, that we're always starting the practice forms in session with the client writing down on any given practice form an example, such that once the session's over and then they're working on a between sessions practice form, that they have that they're never looking at a form that's completely blank. There's already something that's gotten started. They've already, done, written down a few things, circled a couple of days, written down some ideas, so they sort of have, the pump is primed and they have a sense of how to complete that form, that you're discussing specific days and times to complete, and it's written down, and that you're anticipating problems that might come up and you're problem solving those potential barriers. So here's an example of a session summary sheet that could be used. We provide that in the skills for getting started. And again, meant to be no more than a couple words or phrases. This isn't a long journal. What are the key things from a session that the client wants to remember? Ideally, this is done in the client's own handwriting whenever possible, and with some coaching from you that they're talking about, then writing down their ideas, and then you're adding on to them with then an opportunity to remind when the next session is going to be. How session time is used, right? And pacing, and that we need to have enough time at the end of the session for to do that end of session summary, to make sure that you've clarified questions that come up in the home practice, that you've had that opportunity at the end of the session to ask for feedback and say, we're getting close to the end of our time, and before we end, I just want to check in with you. Is there anything that I said or didn't say that just felt off, that didn't sit well with you? Let's talk about that. And that goes a long way to both preventing and repairing therapeutic ruptures. And then there's an opportunity for clinicians in working with depressed clients at the end of every session to be looking for and verbalizing those nuggets of what there is to be hopeful of, here are some things that I see that are very encouraging Here are signs of progress in my sense, not in a fake, overly positive, rah rah cheerleader way, but in a very validating, authentic, life is hard. I know you're struggling, but at the same point, here's some things I'd like to remind you of that are different than when we first started in therapy together. So we provide at the end of the Skills for Healthy Sleep a review form that allows at the end of this time for the clinician and client to talk together about the pieces of this work that have been most helpful for them, and then what they want to carry with themselves moving forward. So the end of that form are, here are some situations that are particularly challenging for me still related to my sleep schedule and my sleep patterns, and what are the skills that are most important, and is there a practice form that I might just want to remind myself to look back on if I need to do some more attention in this area. So we provide 3 tip sheets at the Optimal Aging Center focused on general strategies for CBT with later life depression, attending to the physical and the medical issues, and then summarizing those within session strategies. These are available at the Optimal Aging website. And then the Optimal Aging Center also provides consultation for clinicians in refining their skills. With that, we have finished our overview for the Skills for Healthy Sleep module of treating later life depression. And I hope that you found this helpful.